Ladies and gentlemen, I am thrilled to have Bill Stainton with me. He is a remarkably interesting man with an amazing career, and we are going to talk about innovation and management dysfunction, and who knows what rabbit holes we're going to go down to, but you're going to have fun if you watch this. Glad to see you, Bill.
Good to see you too, Frank. And yeah, I think rabbit holes is an apt description of our conversations.
You have been talking about innovation as and creativity as not something that requires genius, but requires methodology. Is that fair?
Absolutely fair. It requires methodology. Really, what it requires is curiosity, but it 100% does not require genius. Actually, if you look at every now and then, you'll see these lists of the IQs of historical figures, Beethoven and blah 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 and whatever. And Thomas Edison had a pretty average IQ. He was not a genius. Obviously there were geniuses. Edison wasn't necessarily one of them. He was a bright guy, but he was curious. He looked for problems to solve. That was exactly what he did. He looked for a need and then invented a way to fill that need, to resolve it. That was his methodology. And that's the methodology of most innovators. You see something that's not working or not working well, you see a problem, you see a roadblock, you see something, and instead of just whining and complaining about it, like most of us do, the innovator takes it just one more step, just one more step. The innovator asks, ooh, how could this be better? And that's all it takes to shift everything. It doesn't take a genius IQ. You don't have to be a member of Mensa to be an innovator.
Maybe we define genius wrong.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. If we're defining it by strict IQ points, then no, you do not have to be a genius to be an innovator. Really, you just need a couple of traits that we're all born with. We are all born with curiosity, and we are all born loving to figure things out. I call it the toddler doctrine. Have you ever seen a toddler playing with blocks? I don't know if they even play with blocks now. Mostly they have a screen. But if you see a toddler playing with blocks, they're completely absorbed. They're completely focused. They're in the zone. They're in that state of flow and they are intensely happy. Intensely happy. Now, you want to know how to take all that away from them? Show them how it's done. As soon as you look, and here's what's not going to happen. They're not going to look up at you with those big blue or big brown eyes and say, oh, thank you, Daddy. Thank you for showing me the way. No, what's going to happen is they're going to lose interest immediately because you've shown them, because there's no longer a puzzle. We like to figure out puzzles. That's why Wordle is so freakishly popular. That's why somebody asked Merv Griffin once when he was still alive, because it wouldn't do any good to ask him now. He created Wheel of Fortune, the TV show Wheel of Fortune. They asked him, they said, why do you think it's such a simplistic show? It's not like Jeopardy, which he also created. But they said, why do you think Wheel of Fortune is so addictive, is so popular? He said, I think it's this. It's impossible to walk past a screen that shows that incomplete puzzle. And no, I don't care who you are, you're going to pause for a second and try to figure it out. It's just, we've all been there. We see that it's got an R and an S and it's a title, a movie title. Oh, that might be. It's inherent in us. We like to figure things out. And
I get up in the morning and I open my iPad and I go to New York Times games and I do spelling bee and I do Wordle. That's
exactly.
how I start my day every day.
Yeah, exactly. I start by waking up and just screaming. But that's just me. Yeah, we all have our different styles. But yeah, we like that. And so it takes curiosity and the desire to figure things out, which is basically another way of saying solving problems. That's all. And we're born with that. I don't think there's a toddler that's ever been born that doesn't have curiosity. And again, that desire to solve a problem, to figure something out. How's this?
No, they wouldn't learn to speak without it.
They wouldn't learn to speak. They wouldn't learn to walk. They wouldn't, yeah.
It's a survival skill. It's essential. It's what turns a baby into something that can take care of itself.
That's exactly right. And then, of course, that for a number of reasons, some good, some not so good, that kind of gets weaned out of us. Sir Ken Robinson in his TED Talk, which I believe is still the most watched TED Talk, the late Sir Ken Robinson, talks about the educational system and how we're not designed to educate creativity. We don't know what to do with it. And I think there's certainly a lot of truth to that. The education system is still designed to train people for a system that doesn't exist anymore, for a world that no longer exists. Part of it also is that when we're very young, toddler, pre-toddler, we don't know what's important or not. So we absorb everything. Eventually, the brain starts to figure out, it starts to develop the RES, or the RAS, the reticular activating system, the filter, the litmus test, the velvet rope that says you get in, you don't get in. The reticular activating system is that thing that weeds out the noise and decides this is important information, this is not important information. But when you're a
Okay, we're
toddler,
now about, I'm going to interrupt
yeah,
because
yeah, yeah,
a
please, please.
segue into my sphere, which is that management is a reticular activating system, a
Oh, tell me
dysfunction.
more.
There is more information associated with business than a system can absorb, than a CEO can absorb. So he delegates. That is an analog to the reticular activating system.
Yes,
And
these
we
layers.
and we have, yes, and we have layers and layers. The bigger the company, the more layers. And every one of those managers has a finite capacity and is screening stuff their subordinates give them out because they can't cope with all of it. And it gets filtered higher and higher as the layers go. And we've created computer systems that, in theory, are going to bypass this filtering effect by the middle layers of the management. But in fact, the CEO still can't absorb everything. So the dashboard is a filtering mechanism for him as well.
Right,
And
right.
it's necessary. It is absolutely
It
necessary.
is necessary. The only thing that should land on the CEO's desk are the things that truly matter. And because it is necessary, because you can't have everything on his or her desk.
But the trouble is, nobody knows what truly matters
That's
until
right.
after it's too late.
Yeah.
This thing that we are oblivious to comes along and smacks us in the head and bankrupts our company because the CEO, nobody in the system recognized that this was critical enough to go to the CEO until it's too late.
And part of that also is because in most organizations, there isn't any one person, at least not low enough, who can see the entire picture well enough to be able to connect those dots. You've got silos. Even though for years, maybe even decades now, places like Harvard Business Review and others have been talking about we can't have silos. We can't have. I mean, every organization I go to talk to, not everyone, but virtually everyone still has some kind of silo system, even though we've been told that's not the best way to get the great ideas and to spread the ideas. But what happens is that maybe realizing the critical nature of an incident, an event, a trigger requires connecting two dots. And if those dots live in two separate silos, they're not going to be connected until you're exact right, until it's too late.
And the bigger the company, the bigger the silos, the more difficult it is to get information crosswise. And it starts out with the fact that the first large organizations were military and they had to function with chains of command with when the only way to communicate was by people talking to each other or passing pieces of paper
Right.
along. And that only became possible when literacy became widespread. Before that, it was people talking to each other.
Yeah.
And so you needed to have somebody catching as much information as possible, making decisions to tell all these people who were about to get killed to do something that they would not do if they
Right.
weren't terrified of not doing it. So that was the first paradigm for organization. And the next big organization, aside from government itself, which most nations evolved out of armies rather than the other way around.
That's correct.
So it's natural that a nation is going to have a military chain of command built in. And then there are the railroads, which until there was telegraphs had to have extreme discipline, and even after telegraphs had to have extreme discipline. So you had the chain of command was still essential. And in 1920, when General Motors invented its management system and a way to decentralized some of the decisions so it didn't have to go all the way to the CEO. So the head of Chrysler was a mini CEO and the head of
Right.
Oldsmobile was a mini CEO, but they had then had a coordination system so that Sloan, the CEO of the whole company, could understand everything that was going on. Despite massive filtration, he built a system that had a great deal of signal to the noise, and he could manage, and the divisions could manage, and that was incredibly powerful as a vision of how a company should run, and became the role model for almost all the companies that followed in the short run. But it's completely dysfunctional now
Because
because
it's because the context is completely different.
the context is completely different. The technology is completely
Just like
different.
we were
Yeah.
just talking about with the educational system that was designed for an industrial era and
Yes.
an era of hierarchy and just and doing tasks.
Well, if you are a farmer, especially if you were a serf or a tenant farmer, you might have been illiterate. You had a very
Probably
tough
was.
life. You had very serious constraints. Curiosity was dangerous because it might make you a heretic and you might
Correct.
get burned at the stake. And nobody taught you to read. So you had social things and social norms, and innovation was a threat to social cohesion. So we can't blame it exclusively on the school system.
No, that's true. We can't. And there are other contexts. Yeah, it's not just the school system. Again, part of it's the reticular activating system, realizing, okay, we don't need to work on this anymore. It's I forget what rough age. I think it's around age 12 or 13. The part of the brain that specializes in learning languages seals itself off because it figures by this point you've learned the language. Before that age, we could learn as many languages as we want natively. If you've because we're language learning machines, but at a certain point the brain figures, okay, now we can focus on other things. It's
You've
not
got many more important, you've got suddenly much more important things that weren't important at all around that age.
exactly.
Hits and
Yeah,
oh,
exactly.
you're a boy, girls are really important. You need language to talk to them. Girls, boys are really important. You need language to talk to them. Gays, you need language to talk to your partners. And the mental energy that was going into language now is going somewhere
Right.
else.
But we still some so yeah, there are any number of reasons for it. And like I say, some good and natural and some not so good because it's
Right.
taught or because it's considered dangerous. And you're right, in those times it was dangerous and not necessary. Although somebody had to innovate at some point, or else we wouldn't have the printing press. We wouldn't have,
We
you
did,
know, which
most
was a
people,
threat when it came out.
but Leonardo was innovating and Michelangelo was innovating and Martin Luther was innovating and Jesus was innovating and Muhammad was innovating and Buddha was innovating, but they were all relatively affluent people. They were not tenant farmers. And
Yeah, Buddha was very affluent. Not sure how affluent Jesus was, but that's a different conversation.
well, true.
But you're right. They could afford to be somewhat independent, and Leonardo and Michelangelo and their ilk had patrons, geez, and others. So
Well, you know, again, compared to tenant farmers, they were affluent.
eh, fair point.
Compared to you or me, they were pretty poor.
Right.
Compared to you or me, I think Louis the 14th of the Sun King was pretty poor.
I don't know. I've been to Versailles.
But Versailles didn't have flush toilets, it didn't have running water, it didn't have central heating, it didn't have air conditioning. And the quality of food he got, despite having the best cooks in the world, I doubt was much better than what we can get in the supermarket.
I think you're absolutely right. And yeah, I read something the other day. I don't know how strictly accurate it is, but it says something we completely take for granted. 100 years ago, now 100 years ago was 1925, so I don't know if this is true or not. But 100 years ago, the idea of a hot shower was a luxury.
Absolutely.
People didn't have hot showers. Now we they're plentiful. Why? I've got three of them in my own house that I could take.
There was a cabinet secretary in the first Bush administration who was, in his hearings, was being pushed hard because he had been the CEO of a major company and therefore he was rich. He said, I grew up without running water. And I believe Bill Clinton grew up without running water.
Yeah, that's
So,
amazing.
buddy who's in a shelter has running water. If you're in a tent, you don't.
So let's bring this back. We've gone down a rabbit hole. I'll blame myself.
Wow, it's
But
okay. We enjoyed it.
but we were talking about systems of management. And I know that you've been doing a lot of thinking about management. So you just
Yes.
posted about it today.
When I started this consulting firm that is now 6 months and 9 days old, not even a toddler, the premise was I knew some stuff. I had a different point of view than other people, and I could see stuff that other people couldn't see about how systems worked in businesses and organizations. And I could see dysfunctions that were obscure or invisible to other people. And part of that was having been trained in a different methodology a long time ago that is called the theory of constraints, which says if you know where the bottlenecks are and the other constraints in the system, and you manage those, most of the complications of other complications of management diminish.
Yeah.
So having learned that at an early age, compared to how old I am now, it's shaped the way I looked at the world ever since. And things are blatantly obvious to me that other people find obscure,
Right.
such as the fact that the cost of a hospital bed is completely misunderstood. That if you doubled the number of hospital beds, the cost per bed would go down by almost 50% in the short run and probably more than 50% in the long run. Because while you need more nurses, you will probably pay fewer malpractice lawsuits and less malpractice insurance. And that will more than offset the extra nurses. And Americans will be healthier.
Yeah.
And
Let
yet
me
we
ask,
have institutionalized this idea for my entire life. So
right.
I'm coming at this from a different point of view. And if I see that and I see this kind of dysfunction in other places, this is invaluable skill.
Let me ask you a question about that, kind of a clarifying question.
Sure.
Because you say you're able to see things that most other people miss. I do the same thing, and this is what I teach when I go into organizations. I work with them on innovation. How do you spot the opportunities? How do you spot the things that other people miss? I do it, but because I partly because of my career as in comedy and a joke writer, I see connections.
Yeah.
I see ways to take two or more things that don't necessarily belong together and connect them. In comedy, we call it the punchline. In innovation, we call it the iPhone or the printing press. So I'm able to see connections that most people don't because my brain is just it knows it's a connection finding machine. I'm guessing that for you, because of your training, you are looking for bottlenecks. Bottlenecks is your first filter. Where's the bottleneck? And once you find that, everything opens up. But most people don't even know to look for bottlenecks. So that's I see connections that others don't, bottlenecks that others don't.
I would rephrase that slightly.
Please.
I see the missing connections that ought to be there that others don't sometimes.
Interesting. Okay.
So you have a customer service department and you're treating it as a cost center, and you are telling the people in the customer service department, you have a quota of calls. And some days there aren't that many calls and the quota doesn't matter. And other days there are too many calls and you're just trying to keep your head above water. But if you have a quota of calls and somebody has a serious problem that needs 30 minutes and
Mhm.
you should be averaging 10 or less, you are putting your next performance review at risk by giving that person 30 minutes,
Yeah.
which means you are not serving that customer well. And that information that customer is giving you is precious. It's gold. Their problem is a business opportunity. Companies are spending huge amounts of money to do market research. If they put that money into their customer service operation, it would get them better quality returns and happier customers and a longer lifetime value of customers.
As but this is a function again of siloing. That department is rated by their metrics, which is how many calls do we deal with, regardless of the quality of those calls. It's just the quantity of the calls. Let
Not
me
every
argue about
company makes that mistake, but
yeah,
far too
true,
many.
true. I actually read an article about this. I skimmed an article about this just last week, talking about how didn't name any specific companies, but a lot of times, I don't know, have you ever been on hold with customer service and all of a sudden gotten cut off and now you have to start the whole thing over again?
The IRS, the State of New Jersey Tax Authority,
In some cases,
these are supposedly public servants.
they are.
Public
But
enemies is more
let's say, without
accurate.
getting into a commentary on that, let's say it's a company of some sort
Okay.
and you
Sorry,
get
don't
cut
want
off.
to be controversial.
Yeah, that's all right. But in some cases, that may be intentional because if you're taking too long, then the customer service rep on the other end, who is being judged based on the number of calls they make, might just accidentally cut you off. Because once you get cut off, then they can get another call in.
If they cut me
And
off
and
accidentally,
and the hope is that you'll get disappointed, is that you won't even bother calling back.
I've read that and I hope it's rare,
I hope so too.
but I fear it's not as rare as it ought to be because it ought to be zero.
Yeah. But it
So I
comes
know
down to
it's
they're
not as
measuring the
rare.
wrong thing. They're
Yes.
measuring the wrong
Well,
thing.
so just the fact that there are silos means that there are misconnections inherently.
Correct. Yeah,
And silos, unfortunately, are necessary because you need to be trained as an accountant to do accounting. You need to be trained as a salesman to sell. You need to be trained in the techniques of marketing to be a marketer. Definitely need to be trained in deep technologies to be a good computer programmer and to be a systems engineer and a systems administrator. These are not
absolutely.
that they, if you're a website designer because you took website design in art school and you never took a business course, you're going to make pretty, bad websites.
Exactly. Very attractive. Oh, look at that color palette. That's beautiful. But it doesn't do the job. So I would argue that yes, silos are necessary, but that doesn't mean they have to be non-porous and opaque.
Yes, that is part of what I am trying to consult with people about. How do we make the silos functional, but how do we optimize the whole business, not the individual departments? Because if you optimize the individual departments, especially if the measurements are not really good, you're creating conflict and you're sub-optimizing the business.
Not only, especially if the measurements are not really good, but, and this goes back to the example we were just using, if the measurements are not in alignment with the corporate
Well,
values.
that would be my definition of not very good, or one of
Okay.
the definitions. There's so many ways measurements can be bad. They can be bad data, they can be bad aggregation, they could be misunderstood by the person receiving them, even though they're done properly. But the starting point are what are the measurements incentivizing people to do, and is that in their interest of the company? And that isn't that hard.
Yeah, that's not that hard.
And you change those measurements and you change the behavior and you change the corporate culture for the better if you have any sensitivity while you're asking these questions. But if you never ask the question, and they don't, or they wouldn't be making these stupid mistakes,
Right.
then if you never ask the question, this is something everybody ought to be curious about. Everybody in management ought to be curious about this.
This kind of goes to your post this morning, at least this morning, as of when we're recording this, when you talk about changing management systems and that founders tend to instill the management system. And then between what you said and what I commented on, subsequent leaders come in, the founder dies or moves off or whatever, another leader and then another leader, whatever. They come in and they just inherit that management system.
Yes.
And I think sometimes they're not even aware that it's a management system that can be changed. It's just, oh, this is the way things are, even though, as you well pointed out, sometimes the situation changes. So
If
the
you
management
are
system is now a dinosaur in the jet engine age.
if you are the CEO of Apple and you are the heir of Steve Jobs, it's politically fraught to even talk about it. If you're Andrew Jassy, the new current CEO of Amazon, Jeff Bezos is there, right? He may be off in Venice getting married and hopping on
Right.
jet skis, but he's a phone call away. And if you do anything that upsets him, he's going to be back and you have to talk your way through it, which
Right.
you probably, Jesse and Bezos know each other well. There probably isn't a problem. But Jesse's heir is not going to be somebody who knows Bezos and can,
Correct.
and
Or his heir's heir. At some point,
at
there
some
will be
point,
somebody who has no direct connection with Jeff Bezos.
and we talked very briefly about William Sloan. Sloan was there for a long time, and as long as he was there, even though he was retired, he was a reference point, and the
Sure.
system had some flexibility. When he died, it ossified. It became stone. These are the pillars. This is
Right.
Sloan was our Moses, and
That's right.
this is our way, and this is how we do it because he was awesome. And this is the General Motors way, and we are one of the great corporations in the world, and we know what we're doing, and we don't have to think about it because we've had the tablets handed down to us.
We are one of the great corporations in the world, and that will never change. Okay. That's the thinking. We're so
Well,
big, as with Sears at a time.
yeah,
It was
right.
just unimaginable that anybody could, out Sears Sears.
I've read a bunch of stuff about people talking about Kodak recently, and
Right.
they are a slightly different story because they got hit by a tsunami, and the best possible management in the world probably could not have withstood the iPhone. But they had a legacy of their virtues were part of the problem. They took care of their employees, they took care of the city of Rochester. And when technology changed, they had a huge population of people who knew how to make mechanical cameras to put film in,
Film.
and a
Yeah.
huge population of people who knew how to make film, and they had a huge population of people who knew how to make photochemicals. And suddenly you didn't need film and you didn't need photochemicals, and the camera had to be completely different and didn't need any of the mechanical pieces. It was all electronics, which they had no expertise in. And they had a little because they invented the digital camera. The labs knew some stuff, but the
Did.
factories didn't. And all those people were unnecessary. And if you are a custodian and you have a sense of obligation to your workforce, you are completely trapped.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, General Motors hasn't shown that much of a sense of obligation to its workforce.
Oh, maybe they learned from Kodak. It's different management styles for better or for worse.
Yes.
Um, but it almost seems like there should be some C-level position of chief connection officer, chief future seeing officer, a person just whose job it is to.
That there is a person whose job that is, and that's the CEO. And the
Well, it is the
CEO
CEO.
has, but the CEO has come up as a finance man, as a marketing man, a marketing woman, a banker. CEO. They have come up through a silo. And even though at some point they say you need to have general management experience, you need to understand these other functions, and they get moved around, they're still coming out of this very specific training with blinders on that get expanded and porous. But you can't train a 25-year-old in a business school to be a CEO, even though they try.
You can't. I think another problem is that CEOs are not rewarded based on what's going to happen 5 years from now. They're rewarded based on what's going to happen the next quarter.
That is a serious
Quarter
problem.
returns. It's like they're not willing to, okay, let's take a loss in quarter three because in 2029, this will happen.
Zuckerberg
There's
and
a,
Bezos operated that way.
but they were founders.
Zuckerberg still operates that way.
Yeah, but they were founders, and that's a different animal.
That's true. And I think I think there are CEOs who are custodians. I think Iger at Disney has had a custodial point of view. I think Eisner before him to some extent did. I'm sure there are many others. And I've met a few CEOs who I thought had that sort of mindset. But they are constrained by the fact that the board is worried about the stock price. And if the stock price goes too low, then there's a hostile takeover. And what does that do to the workforce? If you're a custodian, you're worrying about the workforce and what happens if you have a hostile takeover and your workforce is decimated. So you have to balance the present and the future. Again,
Which is why it may be too big a job for one person, for one position, for the CEO because I mean, the COO ideally would be in charge of the president, the CEO would be more in charge of the future. I'm not sure that's how it really works in reality.
I think there are some companies where it does. I think so. It's like how many CEOs have I ever met, and how many have I actually had a meaningful conversation with? I've met, oh, when I was in business school, I met a dozen or so. Meaningful conversations, zero. But I'm a sophisticated reader of the press and the business press, and there are examples where it certainly seems like that. And the CEO has to delegate, and they can be wiser or more foolish about what they delegate, but they have to be delegating the present and preserving and protecting the future. That has to be, and the board absolutely needs to be choosing people with that in mind, with the mindset of, are we hiring somebody who's going to boost his bonus today at the expense of the corporation tomorrow? And too many don't, but I think most do. I think most do. But I would argue, and I've never seen this in the press. I asked ChatGPT to look at it up for me, that their management systems is a discipline, that because we rely on that reticular activation system of screening information out and screening information in, that as circumstances change, as the environment changes, as the larger system that any corporation exists in changes, that an innovation over there, my hand is, my innovation over, you got to point at the, yeah, an innovation over
Yeah.
there is going to affect something over there, that the mechanism for collecting information and filtering information and transmitting information in all of its complexity, and the larger the organization, the more complex it is, that has to be the responsibility of the board of directors and the CEO. And they have to be taught how to do that, and nobody's teaching that. There are people who get it naturally. Jobs got it naturally. Bezos got it naturally, instinct. William Sloan got it naturally. But most people, they don't even think, they wouldn't even occur to them to think about it. And I'm not sure that Jobs or Bezos thought of it exactly those terms. They just instinctively knew.
Right. It just happened. They did it.
Yeah, they had a talent for it, and they had an instinct for it, and they were,
Yeah. And if you ask
whether
them
they
to
had
break,
average IQs or not, they had some genius there.
oh, they certainly did. But if you ask them to break down how they did what they did, they might not be able to tell you because
Well,
it
that's
just,
true.
yeah.
If you asked Mozart how he wrote music, you would not get an explanation that would help you write music.
No, because he's been dead for a long time. So that would be a point.
Okay, if
But
you
no,
ask
no.
Paul McCartney, who is still alive,
Actually, and people have asked Paul McCartney, and his answer is you sit down with a guitar and a piano, and if you're lucky, you just put the chords together, and if you're lucky, something good happens. That's there. That's Paul McCartney's masterclass on how to write Hey Jude.
oh,
Just sit down and start strumming or start playing keys, and if you're lucky, Hey Jude or Yesterday or Eleanor Rigby or Let It Be comes out.
it's on TV. There's a TV documentary where you see it with Get Back
Yeah,
and Let It Be. You
yeah,
just watch
absolutely.
him. He's sitting with the bass,
Strumming a bass. That's right.
strumming a bass, which has to be hard on the fingers. He must have really strong hands. He's
Yeah,
strumming the bass, and he's strumming the bass, and then he's strumming the bass, and he's strumming the bass. And George and Ringo were looking bored until then. They're not looking bored, and oh my
right.
God, he's got something. What the hell is this? And
Yeah,
out comes Get Back.
yeah. Here comes Get Back.
It would-
And you
it's
watch them
amazing.
working on the lyrics and all that, and yeah, it just happens. But it does take all four of them. Ringo said recently in an interview, he said the one thing that he's sorry about with that documentary that Peter Jackson put together, that 8 hour doc on that. I'm a Beatles guy. He says that you don't somehow they didn't capture the moment when Ringo went from to ta 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 to which makes the song. It's a great song anyhow, but you put that snare riff in that Ringo's doing that nobody else would have come up with, and all of a sudden it lifts the entire song up. And Ringo, just like Paul would say, I don't know how I came up with that. It just happened. It just happened. And
Right.
Paul, I have a bass in just one room over. I've got a bass guitar. I've got a Fender Precision bass. I've got a Stratocaster there. I've got a Steinway grand piano downstairs. So far, I have not written Hey Jude or Get Back, but there's still time. I
So
can,
done. Well,
yeah.
who was the woman who read Eat, Pray, Love?
Oh,
Elizabeth Gilbert?
Elizabeth Gilbert.
And her TED Talk about genius. Did you see
Hmm.
that?
Yeah, it's fabulous.
Genius, you do the work, and if you're lucky, genius sits on your shoulder.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it
Isn't
was
that a great way of putting
basically
it?
what Paul said, a little more eloquently, but basically what he and Domingo said.
Yeah, no, you, but here's the key part of that as we take another turn is it starts with you do the work. Too many people think that creativity, which is the foundation of innovation, it's not the same thing, but it's the foundation. You need creativity to have innovation. They think I'll sit and wait for inspiration to strike, and when inspiration strikes, I'll write it down. I'll write the novel, I'll write the song, I'll invent the whatever. When inspiration strikes, what Elizabeth Gilbert said and what we saw Paul McCartney doing is that no, it starts with taking action. Paul's just strumming the bass guitar. There's no song there. He's just strumming. It was sitting on his shoulder. Yeah, actually, the movement you need is on your shoulder. Line from Hey Jude. See what I did there? Full circle.
Yes, I saw what you did there.
So it's amazing to see that in real time, isn't it? But he does that. With Elizabeth Gilbert, you do the work, and if you're lucky, but it starts with you do the work. You don't wait for that. What did she say on your shoulder? Inspiration on your shoulder? You don't wait for
Genius.
the
That the
genius.
Romans said genius is a spirit that comes to you if you're doing the work, if you're lucky.
If you're
It's
doing the
out
work,
there. The
that's
genius is you are not the genius. The
it's out
genius is
there.
this thing that might visit you while you're doing the work.
It might, but the key is you've got to take action
And
first. And
so
you've got to be willing to take that imperfect action.
so Edison may not have been a genius, but he had a genius attractor.
Yeah,
Did the
did.
work, and the genius came to him
And
over
I
and
would
over
say
again.
he did have a genius. He did not have a genius level IQ. His IQ may have been, I don't know, 110, 120, something like that, which is that's above average, but the genius that he brought to it was his system. You're talking about management systems. Again, his system, and he talked about this. He said, I just look for problems. I look for things that people need, and then I invent them.
Right of the
That's
theory of constraints was asked about being a genius, and he denied it to his children and to his disciples, who he had many disciples. But he said, no, I'm not a genius. And everybody around him thought he's a genius because this stuff is coming out.
yeah,
And to some extent, he was obviously a very bright man. But one of his advantages in business was that he was not trained in business, he was trained in physics.
yeah,
And he had no preconceptions when he started working with business. And so he had that childlike curiosity about it. And
exactly.
and an emperor's and absolutely no compunction about saying the emperor had no clothes. That's stupid. You're doing
Right.
it wrong.
Yeah, exactly.
We,
And then trying things you've read. I think it might be in the. Where did I get this? I don't know how this crossed my radar. It might be in the book Talent is Overrated. Fabulous book, by the way, where it talks about, and I've read studies about this, that the people who wrote the most influential scientific journals at the time they wrote their best work, they also wrote their worst work. It was when they were prolific. Composers tended to write masterpieces when they're also writing a bunch of crap. It's not universally true, but
we know that there's an archive of Beatles, unreleased Beatles songs that we probably are just as glad not to hear.
there it's actually not as big as you think. There's only about 3 or 4 songs that haven't been released.
Really?
And yeah, and one's called Carnival of Light, which is horrible. There's What's the New Mary Jane, the bootleg of which is on the anthology album. That's a terrible John Lennon song. Yeah, there's some,
There are very likely a lot of them that never got recorded.
exactly, a lot of them that never got recorded.
So if you're Beethoven, you're writing it down and then you say this is Drek and you put it away or you burn it.
Yeah, that's right. And the stuff that even if it comes out in its direct, it doesn't make it through history. We're still listening to Beethoven's Ninth. We're still listening to the Moonlight Sonata.
Yes.
There aren't a lot of productions of Fidelio. Not that Fidelio is bad music, but as far as opera goes, there's better stuff out there.
But it's Beethoven, so they still do it.
They still do because Beethoven puts butts in seats, and orchestras need butts in seats.
Yes.
That's a tough business. That's a
Yes.
tough business being a symphony orchestra.
Well, we're an opera company,
Yeah.
but
So they've got the same kind of challenge that we've been talking about. They are working within a system that really worked well around in the 18th, 19th, and 20th centuries, especially 19th and 20th centuries. That really worked well. The populace was ready for it. Yeah, it was just the timing was right. And now there are other forms of entertainment that are less expensive and whatever. But for whatever reason, it's they've got to start to rethink, and they are, to their credit, they are starting to rethink, okay, what do we do? Because our entire system, the system of a symphony orchestra or an opera company doing this huge production where everybody has to pay a lot of money to come in here, that's no longer working. That's a system that was designed for a different time, and here we are now. So either we're going to go the way of Kodak and become completely obsolete, or we need to figure out, okay, what's the new paradigm for where we are now? Before we started recording, you and I were talking about the huge paradigm shift that is AI. And from what I understand, we're not the only two people talking about this. There are others who are
Really?
talking
You
about
think there are other people talking
it.
about
I've wisps of I've heard, but about the fact that it's changing everything.
it? Yeah.
And of course it is. So many things are becoming obsolete or will become obsolete. And AI is still in its infancy.
Yes.
It, a, today's AI is the internet of 1993,
Maybe 96.
maybe 96. Okay. But go to the Wayback Machine. I think that still exists on the internet and look up any website in 1996. Look up Microsoft. Look
I
up
made
Microsoft.
websites in 1995. I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, exactly. You do. And that's where AI is now. And already it's making photos and videos that are almost undetectable from reality. It's getting better. And it's going to upend so, so much. And the real challenge is organizations, companies, businesses, associations, whatever, churches, organizations du jour, they have to figure out, okay, how do we deal with this now? And then what's it going to be a year from now? What's it going to be 5 years from now? Asking what it's going to be 5 years from now is a ridiculous question. Nobody even needs to ask that question because it's impossible. It's impossible to tell.
Right.
It's complete guesswork. Now and for the coming year, I think we can make some reasonable predictions. They may not turn out to be true, but we've got to take act. We've got to do something. We've got to act. I think the smart organizations aren't just asking how will this affect us, they're asking how will this affect our customers, our clients, our members, our patients.
Absolutely.
And let's what new problems do they have or will they have in the coming year that we can start to solve now that they're not even aware of yet because they're not thinking necessarily that far ahead. I think that's another way of connecting those dots, looking and seeing. My friend Dan Burris calls it hard trends. The things that we know are going to happen. AI is going to continue to evolve. AI is not a flash in the pan. It's not going away.
No.
So it's a hard trend. We can count on it. Just like I always said that you can, I didn't act on it. Shame on me. But way back in my 20s and 30s, I thought it's so easy to predict the future. Just look at where the baby boomers are. Right now, they're starting to have kids. Okay. So in 15 to 20 years, they'll start to be thinking college is going to start to be important or savings. They'll be retiring here. So we can tell what's because the baby boomer generation was so big. Obviously, right now, what's everybody nursing homes, retirement communities, skilled nursing, things like that, estate planning, big things because it's still a big generation of people. You these are hard trends. The baby boomers are going to get older. And now, of course, baby boomers are fading into history. But it's the same thing
I'm
with
not ready to fade yet.
I'm not ready to fade yet either, but I'm a young boomer. If there's an oxymoron now, but AI is one of these hard trends. It's less
Absolutely.
easy to predict though, because we don't know what it's going to look
Yes,
like.
it's much harder to predict than that people who are 20 in 1986, 1970 are going to be old in 2010.
Exactly. That's a pretty easy prediction. And
Yes.
when they're old, what are they going to need? They're going to need soft food. Okay, so let's invest in soft food because that's going to be a big thing. No, they're going to, yeah,
Who knew dentistry would be so good by now?
that's true. Yeah, exactly.
Thank
But
goodness.
yeah, thank goodness. Thank goodness. But it's a fascinating time to be in our field, because basically our field is seeing the future and helping others plan for the future. Me, by exercise, by learning that innovation skill and exercising that innovation muscle. I always say that innovation is the master key that can unlock any challenge that comes our way. That's the tool. Innovation is the key tool, because we can't predict what AI is going to look like. We can't predict what the climate's going to be. We can't predict any of these things with any real certainty. So how do we plan for a future that we do not know and in fact cannot know? And that's where the master key, we learn how to innovate, to see a situation no matter what it is, and find the opportunities that other people miss. That's the master key. That's how you can, if not predict the future, prepare yourself for it by having this tool that's necessary. And you are doing much the same thing
Yes,
by showing people, like, here's how to look. Let's stop trying to predict what's going to happen and plan for that. Let's create this tool that can help us plan for whatever it is. Let's stop treating the symptom. Let's stop putting the band-aid on it. Let's start treating the core. And part of that goes back to what you were talking about with management systems, and nobody is teaching management systems. Nobody is teaching these skills that we need, which are mindset skills, which are synthesizing skills, the ability to cross through silos, the ability to do those kinds of things. These are all learnable.
they're learnable.
They're all learnable, and but instead we're learning tasks as opposed to skills and strategies, I guess.
On that very sad note, I think we should say this has been a wonderful conversation and great fun. And I'm so glad you agreed to do it. And I will be getting you a transcript soon, and we will be publishing this somewhat after. And Bill Stainton, it's been a pleasure.
It's been a pleasure. I'm just sorry we didn't end on the high, uplifting note that you were looking for, that you so craved. But I think there is hope, because I think the more people like you and I have conversations like this, the more businesses have conversations like this, I think it's going to happen. I think we're on a cusp where people are starting to realize that what things have to change. We have to start looking at things differently. And when you start to look at things differently, you start to see the possibilities. I think there's a chance that we're on the cusp of a golden age. Maybe.
I hope so.
I hope so too.
Thank you very much.